Greetings. Welcome back if you joined us for the first segment, and we welcome in our new viewers. We are coming to you live from Wespath's headquarters in Glenview, Illinois, where we have transformed our Wesley Hall into a studio and where we are surrounded by important reminders of our core values, words like teamwork, integrity, stewardship, mutual respect, as we live into our mission of caring for those who serve. My name is Bob Christoffel, your manager of benefits education and your co-host for today's broadcast. Welcome to Live from Wespath, our world, your world, and the church world. These are 3 live news segments with content relevant to you, our United Methodist Church community. I really want to thank you for joining us. With me is co-host and longtime colleague Frank O'Brien, senior benefits educator here at Wespath. Hello, Frank.
Hello, Bob. It is absolutely my pleasure to be with you today as co-host for Live from Wespath. Can you believe that we have had over 2,500 registrants for this event? And we thank you all for taking your time to join us live today. Our goal for today's broadcast is to share Wespath's insights on the topics that matter most to all of you, our valued participants. If our faces look familiar, it may be because you've seen us at an annual conference event, such as a pre-retirement or UMPIP seminar, or maybe you have met us virtually through one of our many benefit education webinars or through our one-on-one benefit education consultations.
That's right, Frank. It's been a really busy retirement season. You might have seen us recently. Just a few housekeeping items before we get started. The platform we're using today is interactive and it enables you to ask questions throughout the broadcast. Please use the question and answer icon to submit your questions. These will go directly to our staff here, subject matter experts who are working behind the scenes answering questions throughout the broadcast. Technical questions, any issues that you encounter, can also be submitted through the Q&A icon. Many of you, hundreds of you actually, submitted questions when you registered. You expressed different areas of interest. We will attempt to answer all of the questions submitted today, but if we're not able to get to all of them, we will follow up with you after the Live from Wespath broadcast. Live from Wespath is being recorded, and you will be provided with the recording links, additional resources, and a really important survey to gauge your interest in future Wespath-sponsored events.
Our second segment, The Church World, begins with the next session called Insights Ahead of General Conference, with Dale Jones and Lynn Hamill. In this session, they will discuss Wespath's key pieces of general conference legislation and how they relate to your benefit plans. So joining us now, Dale and Lynn.
Thanks, Frank. And Dale, glad to be here today and looking forward to hearing about General Conference. So as we think about it, General Conference, the last real one was 2016. So here we are. It's taken a while, but we're there, and 1 day short of 2 weeks away. So can you share with us what Wespath will be focusing on and why it is important to the United Methodist Church?
Our key overall focus, Lynn, is to help assure that the church is sustainable and that it's able to continue to do the all-important work that God has called us to do as United Methodist. And in that regard, there's probably 3 key priorities that we have. Quite a bit's changed since we, in the church and in the world, since we submitted a whole lot of petitions back in 2019. Right. So today, if we look at the key priorities, one obviously is benefit plans legislation. That's one of our key areas of work. Sure. The other, sustainable investments. That's another key area for us. Hope that people had a chance to hear what Ryan and Lucas shared about that just prior to our segment here. And then third, regionalization is important to us as well. Even though that's not legislation that we submitted, it's legislation that we were involved in earlier on and have followed and believe is important for our work and for the good of the church overall. So those are our kind of key 3 areas, benefits, investments, the 2 areas that the church has called us to be responsible for, and then regionalization.
Right. Well, that definitely helps to understand where the focus will be. Our next thought is about Compass, and that's gotten a lot of conversation lately. And Compass is the proposed plan proposed retirement plan, that will replace the current, what we call CRISP or CRSP, that U.S. clergy are using, the Clergy Retirement Security Plan. So if you could share with us why this plan the proposal is so important to the United Methodist Church.
Sure. And I believe there will be a detailed section on
That's
Compass
correct.
later
Right.
on that our
That's correct.
colleagues, Fred and Kim, will lead. So what I'll comment on is kind of the why,
Right.
as opposed to the what it's going to be.
Exactly. Thank you.
Because changing retirement plans is not something you do lightly.
Exactly.
It's a lot of work for us. It's work for the benefits folks in the
Exactly.
annual conferences.
Right.
It's a change, for all of our clergy participants. But as our board of directors looked at trends in the church over time, they became more and more convinced that it was important that we move to a different type of retirement plan than what we've had historically. For really 90 plus years, our retirement plans have provided, at least had some component that provided a lifetime benefit, and also created with that a lot long-term liability for the annual conferences that were the sponsors of those plans. If we kind of just look at the key things that our board was trying to achieve with the Compass design, to care for the needs of clergy, a plan that would provide adequate benefits, that would give some degree of flexibility, that would provide equity for clergy across various spectrum of clergy compensations and clergy statuses. And Kim and Fred will get into more about how the plan achieves those objectives later on in the afternoon. But for the sake of the conferences that are responsible for sustaining the retirement benefits for their clergy, the key objectives were a plan that was sustainable and affordable, that the church could continue to support for the long term.
Right.
And if we just kind of looked at some statistics over time, back when what we know now as the ministerial pension plan first began in 1982, there were over 1,000 United Methodists in the United States for every retired clergy person.
Right.
At the end of 2021, that number had dropped to 236, less than a fourth. And probably if we looked at year-end 2023 numbers, it would be even less than 200, less than 20% of the number of United Methodists per retiree that we had 40 plus years ago. Another thing that's a consideration there is what do the liabilities mean in terms of the obligations for making payments over the long term that have gone with the plans that we've had historically, that have had this lifetime benefit feature. And if you can see the chart here, it's hundreds of millions of dollars over decades.
Right.
Benefits that are pretty well funded today, that we don't really have to worry about the ability to pay those, we hope.
Correct.
But let's not continue to add to those. If we didn't make a plan change, this upper band here on the chart would just continue to grow and would just continue to extend out over time. So several years ago, our board began to look at the need to move to a different type of retirement plan that could still be adequate for the clergy going forward, but would not have the long-term liabilities that have been part of our plans up until now, for a church that in the future might be less capable of meeting those long-term obligations than what we have been up to this point. So I think that's really the kind of the real motivating factor for why
behind there.
moving to a different type of retirement plan. Lynn.
Okay. And do you see that the changing demographics and the affordability? As you've mentioned that there are fewer United Methodists that contribute to the pension, has that also impacted the need for the retirement proposal?
Well, it's a good point. Our clergy demographics have changed pretty significantly over the recent decades. Considerably more persons in part-time ministry, part-time local pastors, even sometimes non-credentialed persons serving as pastors through certified lay ministry and that kind of thing. So with that type of workforce with local pastors, particularly, there tends to maybe be more people in and out, less people that are in ministry for the long term. So again, that also I think plays into why a different type of plan may be more appropriate for the future workforce of the church, and less needed for what we've experienced in the past.
Absolutely. Well, that's very interesting, Compass, and I can't wait to hear what Kim and Fred have to say as they go do a deeper dive into the details of the plan and its features. When my colleagues and I go to Board of Pension meetings, very often the lay and clergy leaders are asking about the other benefit plans, not just retirement, but we have some other benefit plans, and was wondering if you could share some of the General Conference proposals or petitions that we'll be bringing forth regarding those.
Yeah, there are changes that we propose to make to several of the other plans, Lynn. And I should probably also say that even if the Compass plan is adopted, it will not bring about a change, say, for people who are already retired, or even a change for active clergy for the benefits that they've earned under those prior plans.
Absolutely.
Those will still be paid out under the terms of those plans.
Right.
But if the Compass plan is adopted, then one of the things that we do need to do then is close out future service in the current retirement plan, the Clergy Retirement Security Program, and do that in a way so that all the benefits earned under that plan are still protected and are still paid out under the terms of the CRSP plan that exists today. Then for people who have service prior to 2007, under the ministerial pension plan years, 82 through 2006, we'll propose an additional distribution option for the 65% of the MPP account balance that today is available only as a lifetime annuity. We'll propose the same distribution option through life stage retirement income be available for participants to choose if they want to, rather than the life annuity for ministerial pension plan. And Kim and Fred will talk more about that as they describe how it applies to Compass later on, I think. And then our death and disability plan, the comprehensive protection plan, we have some proposals to make some changes there as well. Today, the death benefit amount varies based on whether you retired like before 2013 or after 2013 for the retiree death benefit. We'll harmonize all of that, standardize it so that it's kind of the same for everybody. It'll make things a little less confusing and administration a little simpler, both at the annual conference level and at the Wespath level. Nobody will lose anything from the current death benefits that they have, but we'll standardize it at the kind of higher of the two different levels, and then keep it the same for everybody moving forward. Also, with the comprehensive protection plan, we'll make some changes that for people who are going through the process of applying for disability, that they can get some support started while that process is underway, because sometimes it can take a little while for doctors to get all the medical information in and that kind of thing that's needed for a disability approval. So some enhancements there that will be helpful for anyone who has the misfortune of needing to use the disability benefits. And then one other thing related to benefit plans that we think will be helpful over the long term. Today, we really can't make a change to a U.S. clergy plan, even if it's minor, without that going to the General Conference, right?
Right.
we think there are things that should still be legislated, things like bringing in a new plan like Compass, or even things that change benefits or change features of benefits in plans, or that change costs to the church. Those kind of things should still be voted on by by a legislative body.
Yes.
But for the things that are more administrative, or like when a law changes and some optional feature comes along that
Right.
could be added to a plan, we have a proposal that would allow our board of directors to make those kinds of changes without having to wait to process that through a general conference.
Okay.
And we think that that will be a helpful thing that will create some flexibility for being able to take advantages of any kind of law changes that may come along, to allow us to enhance the plans more immediately, or to make administrative changes that would just be better for everyone, while still retaining those major changes to be acted on by some voting legislative body. Now, other key question, and I mentioned this earlier, is what should that voting body be? What should that body be that still acts on things that need to be legislated with regard to U.S. clergy plans? And that's where we have an interest in the regionalization legislation. It seems to be both inefficient and really kind of nonsensical for plans that affect only U.S. clergy, only churches in the United States, to have to go before an international body that in the future will be majority international, and almost is today.
Right.
And so for the regionalization proposals that would create a regional conference in the United States then would allow that body to enact changes that still need to be legislated in U.S. clergy plans.
Sure.
So that's kind of the specific Wespath interest in regionalization. But then if we just look at, at the petitions that come to General Conference overall and the effect, where they're effective, there's just a lot of stuff that is really U.S.-centric and could be handled in a way that would make the General Conference shorter, more efficient, more economical by acting on it in a U.S. body. So those are the kind of the key things beyond Compass that we're particularly interested in, along with the sustainable investments legislation that would allow us to continue the engagement work that we're have been involved in over time.
Well, it's clear that there's a lot to digest as we look to General Conference. So I just want to remind our viewers, thank you for joining the entire program, but there's also a General Conference website that you can connect to through Wespath. And please go there. There are frequently asked questions, there's videos, there's other documents that you can use to help you prepare for General Conference. I think that ends our segment, and I'll go back to Frank and Bob.
Thank you very, very much, Lynn and Dale. And it is hard to believe that General Conference, the long-awaited General Conference, is just 2 short weeks away. A lot of interest in this topic, obviously, so we have some live questions that we want to bring up. What if the Compass petition doesn't actually pass? How will local churches and annual conferences adjust to this?
Well, we hope it does pass, but should that not happen, our greatest concern would be that the legislation to close the current clergy plan, clergy retirement security plan, that would not close. And so that's critical. And then secondly, we would really need to, I'll say, revisit or modify our proposal and understand why it did not pass, so that we could make the necessary adjustments in 2028 General Conference, because we would propose it again, because we do feel that Compass is that important to the United Methodist Church.
Another question that has come in: are church disaffiliations from the UMC the main reason we need a new clergy retirement plan?
Yeah, I can see why somebody might think that, Frank, but actually our board began to design Compass even before there were disaffiliations a couple years or so before, really just based on the trends that were already occurring in the church before that time. So that's not really the main reason. But I would say that probably the disaffiliations maybe make the change to Compass more important and maybe more urgent in terms of timing than might have been the case if we had not had the disaffiliations. But we would have brought the proposal forward and were in the process of doing that before there was a special session that created disaffiliation legislation.
Dale, a lot of interest has come in from retired clergy and the impact of Compass on their benefits, and we know that that's not the case. That will not impact their benefits. But a couple people have asked, if we are not yet retired, so still active, will my accumulated monthly defined benefits, will they still be paid? So the accrued benefit, will that still be paid at some point?
Yes. The benefits that persons have earned under ministerial pension plan, clergy retirement security plan, up until the point that Compass becomes effective, if it's approved by the General Conference, those will be paid out under the terms of those plans, just like they would have been if there were no Compass. And it will be only, Compass will only apply to benefits earned from its effective date going forward beyond that point in time.
Okay, thank you for that. We have one more question for you, Dale and Lynn. Please explain why the General Conference legislation, Compass, will be an improvement for clergy in contrast to our current plan, or what are the disadvantages for the clergy going forward?
The group that follows us may get into this a little bit more. Overall, Compass is a little less, not majorly so, but slightly less generous, slightly less costly plan than the current clergy retirement security program, and that does not generate additional long-term liabilities. And so the major advantages are it's a plan that we believe the church can sustain for the long term, as opposed to the current plan, which we think may not be sustainable for the long term. So I would say the advantages really are assurance that there would be an adequate retirement benefit provided for clergy for decades yet to come, versus some concern that that might not be feasible if we didn't make a plan change. We've seen already in the retiree health benefits that conferences provide some impact of what happens when conferences don't do anything and then have to eliminate that benefit altogether for future generations of clergy, versus those that have made some changes that were probably hard to make, but still allowed them to retain a benefit even though it might not be as generous as the previous retiree health benefits. So a similar principle here for Compass.
Thanks very much, Dale and Lynn. And be sure to visit us if you are attending General Conference. Stop by our booth. Lots of information on our website regarding General Conference and proposed legislation. The second topic of the Church World segment of Live from Wespath is going to focus on and discuss a really important topic: how clergy fare across all 5 dimensions of well-being, and share the efforts, really important efforts, of Wespath and the General Board of Higher Education and Ministry to collaborate together with church leaders in fostering positive change for clergy. So I'm real happy to have joining us right now, live from Wespath, Christina Bello and Kelly Wittich. Thank you, and what can you tell us?
Thanks so much, Bob and Frank, and thanks, Kelly, for joining us to talk today about clergy well-being. I know last year at Live from Wespath, we had just gotten the results and the report from the 2023 survey, and we teased it a little bit at this event. So can you talk a little bit more now about the full report and the results that we got, and a little bit of background?
Thanks, Christina. I'm happy to do that. So back in 2023, we did a survey, the Clergy Wellbeing Survey, and we've actually been doing this survey since 2012. So this is our 6th time through it. We sent outreach to 5,000 clergy, and we had about a 25% response rate. We do contract with an external provider, Versta Research. They kind of keep us honest and make sure that we're using good research techniques to make sure we do that. So we did that. We were able to really dig in, and To be honest, 10 years ago when we started this, we felt like we had a problem with clergy well-being, and things haven't gotten better, they've gotten worse. So I would say that our problem's getting a little bit worse.
Yeah. I know emotional well-being has been a particular area of concern since the survey began, like you said. Can you talk a little bit about what that 10-year trend has looked like for clergy?
Yeah, I mean, really the 10-year trend throughout well-being has been problematic, in various aspects. And before I dig into emotional, if it's okay, I just want to talk about one metric that we use. It's just perceived well-being, and this is one where we can really see what the 10-year trend looks like. Now, perceived well-being is actually considered a pretty good proxy for overall well-being when you're looking at a survey, right? There's no objective measurements. You're not, actually checking people in the doctor's office or anything like that. So perceived well-being is kind of the best we can do as a proxy in a survey. And if you look at the dark blue and the green, those are, clergy who say that their overall well-being is excellent or very good. You can see from the left down to the right, so 2013 down to 2023, that those numbers are shrinking, the number of clergy that are reporting very good or excellent well-being. Conversely, if you look at the top, the orange and the red, the number of clergy that are saying that their well-being is fair or poor is increasing. So this is kind of one of the top line things that we saw in the 2023 survey. But digging into your question about emotional well-being, when we look back 10 years, we really see that functional symptoms of depression. So this is something that, people aren't necessarily diagnosed with depression, but they're demonstrating symptoms that are associated with depression. Symptoms like difficulty sleeping, difficulty concentrating, impact to their eating habits. And what we're seeing is that the number of clergy that are facing these functional symptoms of depression has significantly increased from 2013 to 2023. So that's a really bad story. Additionally, if we compare the clergy results to a matched benchmark, so we look at a national benchmark and then take the benchmark and sort of match it up to the demographics of the folks who actually completed our survey, we see that clergy have historically and consistently been significantly worse than the benchmark. So again, not a great story. It hasn't been for a long time, but it's only gotten worse.
Yeah. I know physical well-being has been another area of concern. Can you talk a little bit about what that's looked like over the past 10 years?
Absolutely. So the stats that we look at for physical well-being, one of the biggest ones we looked at is BMI and obesity. And that's a real sensitive one, right? Like some people kind of take that one personally. And I want to be very clear that when we talk about obesity and BMI, we are purely looking at it from a health statistical standpoint. This is not about, aesthetics. It's not what makes a person beautiful inside and out. But what we know about BMI is that it's about as good a measure that we have when we're looking at populations.
Right.
When we're looking at individuals, there may be some individuals it's not perfect for, but when we look at populations, it's a decent metric. It's one of the best that we have. So when we ask clergy to report on their body mass index and height and weight, and what we're seeing is that in 2013, 40% of clergy rated themselves as obese. In 2023, that's up to almost 50%. Wow. So already clergy were significantly worse, again, than that matched benchmark. And unfortunately, what we're seeing is that has only gotten worse. There are some other aspects of physical well-being and physical health that we look at. Diabetes and pre-diabetes, as well as hypertension, which is high blood pressure, and pre-hypertension, which means approaching high blood pressure. So when we look at those metrics as well, we're seeing that those have gotten worse over the 10-year period. Okay. So again, they're all kind of interrelated. The body mass index getting worse impacts the rates of diabetes getting worse, impacts the rates of hypertension getting worse. So it's all kind of interrelated.
Okay. I mean, those are both two very concerning areas, and I know, one of the other parts of the survey that we did was looking at demographics. Were there any differences in responses based on demographics from the survey? So
we did look at we looked at different demographics, and I want to share that we oversample underrepresented demographics. Okay. So for instance, in the United Methodist Church, the vast majority of clergy, at least for whom we know what their race and ethnicity is, are identifying as white. Okay. We don't have perfect data in terms of race and ethnicity for clergy, so that kind of makes things complicated. But because of that, when we do this survey, again, we partner with a company that makes sure that we do this right so that we can do the statistics right. And so what they do is they oversample clergy of color, because they want to make sure that they get enough responses, or we get enough responses, that we're actually able to make some generalizations. So that's one thing to think about. And then the other thing, so you asked, are there differences? So we found, for instance, with Black clergy, that they report more significant problems with some of the areas of physical well-being, particularly obesity, hypertension, diabetes. That's actually true in the general population as well for Black individuals, Black Americans, and so not a terrible surprise, but it's something that's consistent with that. Whereas white clergy are reporting higher rates of depression and lower spiritual well-being. Black clergy also report better spiritual well-being and lower stress and depression.
Okay.
Asian clergy report better physical well-being overall and less stress, and Hispanic clergy report more occupational stress and, interestingly, more conflict over disaffiliation.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So those are really interesting, just kind of pieces based on the demographics of the 2023 survey. Were there any other kind of specific or unique pieces of information that came out just from the 2023 versus the 10-year look back?
So we did ask some new questions in 2023, because 2023 came after, 2021 survey, which came after 2020, which was a super challenging year in the United Methodist Church and throughout the country and throughout the world, frankly. So we did have some specific, I may not have that, so I'll go back to that. So we did have some specific things that we looked at for 2023 only. The first was the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on different dimensions of well-being. And not surprisingly, we saw that the COVID-19 pandemic impacted people's well-being. It varied by individuals, right? There are some people who actually thrived, in areas of their well-being thrived during the COVID-19 pandemic. Some people were able to save more money because they weren't, going out and spending quite as much. Some people, reported better physical well-being, and that could be because they were able to find more time for, exercise at home or something. The two areas where we saw the most significant negative impact were in emotional well-being and social well-being. And again, I don't really think that that's a terrible surprise. Like, I think that when we think about the COVID-19 pandemic and how it impacted individuals across the country, it's not really a surprise to think, wow, that created a whole new kind of stress and fear and anxiety that would impact emotional well-being. Sure. And then it certainly isolated people, socially. So I think that has an impact. One of the things that, as we've had conversations, that we hear clergy talking about is just the strain of the conversation and the dynamic in the country about virtual or in person, and running a church virtually versus in person. One thing I've heard pastors say over and over is that they suddenly had to become technology experts in a way that they just really were not trained to do, and that really had a negative impact on some of their emotional well-being, just because it was just an added stress and demand that they just weren't prepared for, and they really didn't have time to do the learning on that. So that was one thing that we really looked at in 2023. And the other thing we looked at is conflict related to disaffiliations. So we hypothesized that that there was just probably more stress in general in the United Methodist Church for clergy because of all the noise and anguish and anxiety related to disaffiliations. So we did ask a question about conflict related to disaffiliations, basically just to have clergy identify, the clergy who responded, did they experience that conflict related to disaffiliation, and then that way we could see how that might have impacted their well-being. We saw 37% of the respondents who said that yes, they experienced some conflict related to disaffiliation, and what we found is that every single dimension of well-being was impacted negatively by conflicts associated with disaffiliation. So I don't think, again, not really a surprise, but important to have that data so that we can all really reflect on, what that's done for clergy.
Yeah. And that's a great kind of segue into my last question. You talked about, we have all this data, how can we reflect on it? So what are we doing with all this information?
It's a good question. We absolutely can't, do all this survey and then do nothing. And that's never really been our way. We've been doing this for a little over 10 years now, and we always ask, what now? So one of the the big roles that we feel like Wespath has related to this data is besides reporting it out, which I think that that's very important. I think, having this data, having a reliable, repeatable survey that we've done for over a decade, that really can put up a mirror to the church and say, hey, this is what's going on. So, take note. So we have that mirror, and I think it's important for us to share, and we've shared, like you said, we teased it a little bit when we just had the data last year. We in 2021 we did the First Aid for Mental Health series as a response to the concerns about emotional well-being. So we've done that. This year we're really just trying to go broader, if you will, and we have a partner. So we are partnering with the General Board of Higher Education and Ministry to really just try to get that word out there and further the conversation. So they've been fantastic partners, and what we're trying to do is with each dimension of well-being, we're trying to have a series of communications, and for each dimension of well-being, we have a video that kind of gives the emotional tug, why is this dimension important, and why do we even care about this dimension? Then we have our information. We've got loads of information and resources, so we make sure to share those. And then importantly, we have an effort to try to collect more data. So not like a robust survey like the Clergy Wellbeing Survey, but an attempt to try to collect more data from clergy on what they think about the church, about their ministry, about their role in the United Methodist Church makes those aspects of well-being either easier or frankly probably more likely harder. What about their ministry, what about the dynamics between their conference and their local church makes it hard to take care of their spiritual well-being, their emotional well-being. We hope that by learning more about that, again, we can just share back that information, create opportunities for new conversations, maybe some in-person gatherings, and hopefully, give the leaders and the change makers in the United Methodist Church the information that they need to really figure out what do we need to do next. Wespath is not under the illusion that we can, come up with the solution to this problem. We know that is, it's not just our problem to solve, but I think that we do have this reliable information that we can share and hopefully spark the conversations that will solve this problem.
That's great. And I know on the website that we have the QR code for right now.
Yes.
We've already published the emotional well-being information and resources. Next week, we'll be focusing on spiritual well-being, and then the additional dimensions kind of going through every other month through fall. So.
And some really great work done. I mean, this is really some comprehensive resources and really hopefully makes people think about some of these in a different way. And I know the one last slide you had, is anyone interested in downloading the full well-being report? That's available on the website as well. And we also have the historical ones too. So if you're into history and you want to see how things have changed over time, we have 2023, which kind of goes into greater detail about all the things we have here, but we do have the historical ones as well.
Fantastic. Bob and Frank, I'll send it back to you to open it up for questions.
Well, thank you, Kelly and Christina, for this important and insightful information. We do have some questions for you this morning. Do we know the root causes for these changes over the past 10 years?
Great question. I think we have hypotheses. I think that we are aware of some contributing factors. I mean, certainly the trajectory in the U.S. isn't necessarily going in the right place. So I think a lot of the things that impact clergy are the same things that impact their other fellow American counterparts. One thing, though, to make note of is that clergy have been performing significantly worse in certain dimensions than their, general American counterparts. And so, as for the root cause of that, I mean, again, hypotheses. If you go back to the Church Systems Task Force, there are certain aspects of church systems that we think impact well-being. But that's part of why we're doing this question, right? That's part of why we're doing the work we are with the General Board of Higher Education and Ministry, is we would like to know from you, what do you think the reasons are that clergy well-being is declining? Because that information is an important part of the conversation.
Thanks, Kelly. A lot of interest in this topic. This question just came in. Since it's a small sampling of clergy, it seems tough to know about the full population. Do you assume that other clergy are in better condition or worse than the responses that we've gotten?
So this is exactly why we hired the survey experts to help us go through this survey. So because we choose a representative sample and then oversample, that means that means if X percent of the population is female, then we make sure that X percent of our survey participants are female. If X percent of the population is from, this jurisdiction, we make sure that X percent of our survey participants are from that jurisdiction. So the goal is to get a representative sample of survey participants so that you can then generalize. There are always risks associated with all different types of research. There's always potential for bias, but what we try to do by being so rigorous in the way that we conduct the survey is to make it reliable. We repeat it year after year, so we feel fairly confident that the trends are generalizable to the total U.S. clergy population.
Thank you for that, Kelly. Certainly we have generated some interest in this, and one question we received is, when will the next clergy well-being survey take place?
So we're now doing it every other year. This one was kicked off in the first quarter of 2023. We did tease we teased the information last year, but we also released the results in full last year. So the next survey will be conducted in the first part of 2025, and you can expect those results to be available in the middle of 2025.
Thanks, Kelly. And I think you did address this, but a couple people are asking, how can we trust the data?
Yeah, I think it has to go back to using strong research techniques. And, I have some background, I have team members that have some background in public health, and we certainly have some expertise in that, but not nearly enough, which is why we hire the external company, which really has expertise in survey design and research design and statistical analysis. I will say that every year, we have these ideas of, what if we tweaked this here? And they're like, it's less repeatable if you do that, so just leave it be. So they really do help us adhere to best practices so that we can really trust that data.
And we have one last question for you. One participant says, I am surprised to see in the survey that clergy of color don't have more emotional stress considering the emotional toll of the past few years. Can you address that?
That is a question that I have personally asked, and we've had conversations with a number of other parties, some other sister agencies, the national plans as well. I don't know the answer to that. I had one gentleman from an annual conference in the Indiana annual conference who actually told me that maybe if other churches had more gospel choirs, and I don't know that I don't know that he was joking. I think that he was serious. That for him was something that personally helped his own emotional well-being. I don't have an answer to that, and what I hope we can do is that we can continue to have that conversation, that we can have conversations and focus groups and things like that to help delve into that, because I don't think that I can answer that. But I think that together in the United Methodist Church, if we ask the questions and try to figure out the root causes, we have the best chance of figuring out how to move forward for clergy of all different demographics, but for clergy overall to really maximize their well-being.
Great, and I think that actually leads really nicely into the next segment that we have.
It
after
does.
This.
That's right.
So I'm going to hand it back to
Yeah.
Bob and Frank to introduce our next presenters.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kelly and Christina, for sharing this important information. The collaboration that you're doing with the General Board of Higher Education and Ministry is just wonderful to hear on this important topic. We will be providing you with some additional resources in our follow-up to the Live from Wespath. But up next is the third topic of our Live from Wespath, the church world, helping clergy of color thrive. This segment features both Cynthia Dopke and Reverend Dolamar LeBron, and their conversation will discuss important research on the impact of COVID-19 on United Methodist Church clergy of color. So I welcome in both Cynthia and Reverend Dolamar.
Thank you, Bob and Frank. It is so good to be here and a great opportunity to be able to share with you, our participants. As we already know, clergy well-being is extremely important for the life of the church because healthy leaders foster healthy churches. And we also know that clergy of color experience additional systemic brokenness and challenges, both within our society and within the church, that, as we already know, were exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic. Personally, as a clergy person who has served in the epicenter of the pandemic in Manhattan and New York, I know firsthand the impact that it took on me leading a community that was experiencing so much change, experiencing so much loss. And I remember specifically, there was one day I was waiting for food to be delivered for our food pantry, and in the midst of that, getting a call from an older parishioner whose son had been admitted to the hospital for COVID, and she didn't speak English, and I'm on the phone trying to translate for her and help her, because the reality is that oftentimes as pastors, we serve as spiritual leaders, but we also serve as social workers, translators, trying to meet the need. And I was really grateful for our community that really stepped up and was extending a hand to help juggle all of the responsibilities of leading a church, as we've already heard, responsibilities of learning new technology, of creating new protocols for PPE, of trying to hold, right, all of this at the same time while personally grieving and a community that was in grief. And so I do believe that all of the 5 dimensions of well-being, our spiritual, our emotional, financial, and physical well-being were affected. And although I do believe that the pandemic also kind of offered us as a church an opportunity to learn how to grow and connect even deeper and connect in new ways, it definitely has been disproportionately challenging, particularly for clergy of color. And so I was really grateful to hear that Wespath was being really intentional about how to read and analyze the moment and how to respond to it.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dorlamar, for sharing your personal story, because I think that's what it's really about, is helping us to understand at the very personal level, on the ground, in congregations, how clergy were affected. And that's a lot of what we learned in this report. And we really began to engage this work to try and understand the impact of the pandemic on clergy of color through the Clergy Financial Wellbeing Initiative.
Can you say a little bit more about this initiative and what is the background behind this initiative?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Clergy Financial Wellbeing Initiative is something that Wespath has been engaged with since 2015 at the invitation of the Lilly Endowment, where they invited us and church organizations across the country to address the economic challenges facing pastoral leaders. And so we said yes to that challenge. But we didn't do that alone. So it's been a very collaborative effort that we've been doing with the National Association of United Methodist Foundations, with the General Board of Higher Education Ministry, Discipleship Ministries, and more recently even the United Methodist Publishing House that published Saving Grace, A Guide to Financial Well-Being, which is has also a clergy workbook to look at clergy financial well-being. It's a Wesleyan-based 6-week study guide that can be used in small groups, sold at Cokesbury, if you haven't checked it out. So we've been doing that work since 2015 in a variety of ways, and then 2020 comes along and the pandemic hits.
Right.
And we already heard from Kelly and Christina the context in which our clergy were experiencing well-being and the decline that came with it, with the stress in the system around disaffiliations and overall decline in well-being. And during the pandemic, we also experienced and witnessed how communities of color were being harder hit by the pandemic itself, with higher COVID rates and deaths and greater economic impacts.
That's right.
And at the same time, we were witnessing with real focus the ongoing systemic racism that we've been experiencing in this country that really necessitated a rise in racial justice movements like Black Lives Matter and others after the killing of George Floyd, and so many others who've been unjustly killed through our justice system.
Yeah.
We also saw a rise in anti-Asian hate at that time. And so this time became framed as like a double pandemic, and we knew that this was affecting our clergy as well.
Right.
And the Lilly Endowment agreed that we needed to continue bringing this kind of focus on addressing the challenges facing pastoral leaders. And we agreed at Wespath that this was important to bring a much more narrow focus on how were pastors faring during the pandemic, after the pandemic, and especially in communities of color, with clergy of color. So I just want to say a word of thanks to the donors, too, who helped with the matching grant to the Lilly campaign to really make this work as effective as it can be. And we're really appreciative of that. And so as we said yes to this work, we recognized with our broad advisory group that Gammon Theological Seminary had done some research already among the black churches on how they were impacted by the pandemic. Yeah, through the Gammon Research Institute. And we approached them and said, asked if they would partner with us to broaden that research to see how had the pandemic affected clergy of color across the United States. And gratefully, they said yes. And so we bring to you today the research findings that we have. And what they did was help design a survey tool that we could share with clergy across the United Methodist Church in the United States. And we also convened a number of focus groups, which was a really important component of doing this qualitative research and hearing the stories and understanding what clergy were experiencing. We received 381 responses across the jurisdictions between July 2022 and April 2023. And this really gave us an opportunity to expand our partnerships even. And so we've been working with Global Ministries and with the Commission on Religion and Race and with the Commission on the Status and Role of Women and especially the Ethnic, Racial, National Plans and Caucuses, who are really, their constituents are clergy of color in many ways. And so we've been collaboratively working on hearing the stories, gathering the data, and implementing some programs that are providing relief. So that's been a really important outcome of this work, is really about building the relationships for long-term sustainable relationships to clergy that we consider kind of underserved from Wespath.
Absolutely. On the screen, you'll see a QR code where you could download. You could use your phone and download the full report if you want to see it. You know, I think this is one of the projects we're really proud of, and we're really hoping to do more of this work. And so, you know, why don't you share a little bit of the highlights of what came out? What were the highlights of this survey, the data from this survey?
Sure. Well, some of the key findings, similar to what Kelly shared too, so not surprising, the greatest impact was in social well-being and relational health. And just the sense of the widespread impact that really created a ripple effect of grief and loss in communities, and just all of a sudden the strain on the need to isolate, shelter in place. Many congregations had to shut their doors. It was just a time where people needed a lot more support.
Yeah.
And in many cases it wasn't there.
Right.
So second highest impact was in emotional well-being. There were higher rates of stress and fatigue that clergy were feeling during the pandemic, and certainly ripple effects afterwards, and higher rates of anxiety, not knowing what was going to happen.
Right.
And the sudden change in congregational life, again mentioned before, that where people had to suddenly try to do worship online.
Yeah, and learn this technology. People of all different ages.
Right.
I mean, the spectrum. It was.
Right. It was a big shift. It was a big shift. And then another impact we found was a decrease in physical well-being. Some of the smaller clergy populations in the United Methodist Church reported this. We heard this from Pacific Islander clergy and from Native American clergy, and some who identify as multiracial. So those were the key findings. Yeah, and some of the recommendations that come from this report too are that we need to continue addressing the needs for those who are oftentimes marginalized, and find ways to provide that long-term emotional support, especially to deal with the deep grief and loss that communities felt in a widespread way.
Absolutely. And, again, this is just us doing our part. We know we're not the solution. We will not bring a solution to these really large concerns, but we are raising awareness and we are trying to do as best we can with our parts. And I think some of the ways that we've been able to respond is, we were able to partner with the Mountain Sky Conference, where we offered support for a Clergy of Color retreat to help clergy find renewal and rest. We had the opportunity, by invitation of Bishop Hector Burgos, to support Upper New York Conference and their Bishop's Retreat, where we were able to offer wellness workshops, where our very own General Secretary, Andy Hendren, was able to be the keynote speaker and share his experience of wellness and how he cares for himself. In addition to being able to partner with the Hispanic National Plan in the Entre Nos event, to partner with Gammon again on their Founders Day training, partnered with Black Clergy Women's Self-Care Grants. So we've been able to really respond to this, and I think that it's something that we hope to continue to do. I don't know if there are any questions in the audience, but back to you, Bob, to see if there's any questions.
Well, thank you, Cynthia and Dolomar. Certainly some thought-provoking material here. I would say really the two topics in a row in this segment working together really give all of us a lot to think about and reflect on. We have received some questions coming through. So the first one for you is, what are steps we can take to support our clergy of color?
Well, thank you for that question. I think the most important thing is to find out what is happening in your annual conference. We are doing a lot of partnering with annual conferences and foundations. Those have been some of our key partners in creating new ways of addressing the needs of clergy of color, especially in this post-pandemic environment. And so a lot of the groups that we've worked with also are, like we mentioned, the national plans and caucuses. They are providing a variety of approaches to addressing some of the needs. And also Black Clergy Women had some self-care grants that they were offering, and the Asian Pacific Islander Women, Clergy Women gathering were providing some scholarships and providing some benefits education. So I would say first and foremost, try to find out what is going on in your area. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. We often talk about the 5 dimensions of well-being and how they're connected. One viewer would like to know which areas of wellness are considered the most concerning from the report's findings.
Yeah, that's a good question. Again, I think there were the 3 main areas that have been shown to be impacting folks. And as someone who has been on the ground, I think I would agree with this as well, has been the social wellness, or social well-being, relational health, the fact that, even those of us who are now in a space where we can be together in person, this period of time has changed us. So we may not be as social as we used to be. And so there's a lot of things that were impacted about that, the emotional well-being, and again, the physical health. But I also think that one key part of this survey that showed us was that spiritual well-being was actually increasing. And so it is really important to note that in these moments, our faith has been foundational in carrying us and giving us the strength to continue. And for many of us who believe in a God who makes ways out of no ways, who believe in a God that even in the midst of challenging circumstances, that believes in that promise that best of all, God is with us. And I think that spiritual wellness can continue to be a rock and a foundation as we continue to navigate all these different seasons that the church is going to be moving into right now.
Well, thank you for that. We do have an additional question for you, and you have touched on this, but I think it's good to reframe it. Why are people of color more negatively impacted than others?
Well, during the pandemic, what we saw was, and this was based on the reports and research from agencies like the Center for Disease Control, where we saw higher rates of COVID and economic hardship. And so as we're thinking about how clergy have been impacted, we know that our clergy of color in the United Methodist Church are serving those communities. And so there are added stresses, and as I mentioned before, the ongoing systemic racism that our communities are facing adds a level of stress and anxiety that is part of what our clergy are having to face. And so I think, again, that was framed as a double pandemic, and so we have understood that this is what our clergy of color are facing and having to wrestle with as we are coming out of the pandemic environment.
Yeah, and I would add, we experience these things personally as individuals, but we also experience kind of holding a community that is also living through these experiences as well. So all of that are just compounded, added stressors in this season and this time.
And just one more question. How is Wespath connected with the Native American community?
Well, we have been, first and foremost, the clergy members within the Native American community are participants of Wespath, and we, along with the other national plans and caucuses, we've reached out and partnered with the Native American community. We had a really important listening session with them to hear how deeply impacted they were during the pandemic. And so we're making, I think with all of this work, we've recognized the need to reach out and build relationships and respond contextually to the needs that our clergy have, especially those that have greater needs and are what we consider probably less served by Wespath as they could and should be. And so that's our work going forward.
Yeah, agreed.
All right. Well, thank you so much, both of you, for joining us. And Reverend Dolomar, a few comments came in about you mentioning the Upper New York Bishops Retreat that we both attended and the other partnerships that Wespath has done.
As we move along in this segment, I would like to remind our viewers that the best way to stay up to date on your benefit plans and services is to follow us on social media, which provides the latest and greatest resources available to you from Wespath. You can find us on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, YouTube, and X, formerly known as Twitter. Our fourth topic of segment 2, the church world, presents a final overview of the impact of church and clergy disaffiliations and how the UMC is moving forward. We have Dale Jones and Reverend Dolomar LeBron back in the studio with us. It is good to see both of you again. Dale, Dolomar?
Hey Frank, thank you so much. It is good to be here to continue this conversation. We heard a little bit in the last segment about the double pandemic that specifically clergy of color have experienced, but overall that have been affecting clergy. And we want to talk a little bit more about the other buzzword that has been going around for a few years now, the third pandemic of disaffiliations. That has been causing a lot of anxiety. There have been a lot of questions, a lot of people who think they know what it means, what it looks like. And so, I don't know, Dale, why don't you give us a big picture of really where we are in the United Methodist Church at large with disaffiliations?
Okay, sure, Darla Mark. We've tried to follow that as well as some other groups in the church have, and keep track of it as the kind of numbers have accumulated over the last really 3 years, and particularly probably culminating primarily in 2023. If we kind of look at the U.S. overall, the key with the red numbers here being closures, probably most of which would have happened anyway unrelated to disaffiliations, but a few of which might have actually been kind of disaffiliations processed as closures, and then the blue numbers being those that processed as disaffiliations through that provision that was enacted in 2019,
Right.
paragraph 2553. It amounts to somewhere around over 9,000 altogether, with probably and a little over 30% of the churches that were in existence in the U.S. At the end of 2019, with probably maybe 4 or 5% of that being churches actually that would have closed regardless through, as we have happening every year, and then the balance of it being churches that would have that went through the disaffiliation process. And you can see from the map that it differs quite a bit from region to region,
Right.
with the heaviest impacts being across the southeast, south central, pretty significant also in north central, where we are here in northern Illinois, although not specifically in this particular conference.
Right.
Less so in northeast, and then in the west, really more of an impact just from routine closures than from disaffiliations. Of the probably 8,000 or so churches that left through disaffiliations, by and large, they were on average, about the same size overall as the churches who remained United Methodist, maybe just slightly smaller. In some conferences, there were a higher level of larger congregations that left. In other conferences, it was mostly small congregations that left. And we don't know exactly the numbers, but we think probably about half of those became Global Methodist Church congregations, and then the other half are various forms of independent or
Right.
Methodist churches in their communities.
Yeah, this is helpful. It's helpful to see that the impact is not just based on disaffiliations, but just the overall trend of church closures, to give us a better insight as to what impact it really had. And then, of course, maybe some of our viewers or people like me who've decided to remain in the United Methodist Church, how are my benefits affected by disaffiliations? It's really, I think, the question on a lot of people's minds is, how does this affect those of us who've remained here in the UMC?
Well, I guess the good news would be that if you stayed in the United Methodist Church, then your benefits stayed in the United Methodist Church, and they're still secure. That there was not anything related to the disaffiliations or the closures that diminished the benefits of anybody who remained, or changed them in any way, the benefits of anybody who remained in the United Methodist Church.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's good to know, and that's good for our audience to hear that it doesn't really affect it. And the reality is, I know there's a lot of our people who are watching, and personally, both of us have personal experiences around impact and the disruption of disaffiliations. I mean, I have family members who are no longer United Methodist. Like, what does this mean when it's bringing a division in your own family? And I also I feel like I hear less and less there being this conversation about how terrible this is, or how awful this season is, or this moment is. And what we're actually seeing is like people excited about a new opportunity, about what God is doing now, right? What we're witnessing, I think, is like an energy of people willing to recommit themselves, right? When we look at this map, when we're looking at that map, we don't just see churches that have left or have gone, but we see opportunity of a new field of where we can engage new people. How have you seen that in your circles, Dale?
Well, I think similarly, Dorlamar, it's in one of the annual conferences that I attended this year, where there were a significant number of disaffiliations processed, in a conference really that had been my home conference for a number of years. There was both the grief of the loss and the separation, and as you said, people who had been friends and family and so forth, kind of going in different directions, but also a real commitment to moving forward. And across the whole church, we've kind of been in a time of conflict that's been unhealthy and unhelpful. And it seems like now we're maybe at a point where everybody can move beyond that. You know, those that have disaffiliated and those that have remained.
Right.
And God's reign can come about in both segments, you know, in a greater way than it has been maybe before. You mentioned this John Wesley quote a little bit earlier in the previous segment about COVID. You know, the best of all, God is with us in my home, the church that was my home congregation for many years, and the church where my kids were baptized and we were married, where my spouse was called into ministry. You know, that's no longer a United Methodist congregation. That was a hurtful thing for me in some ways, but I know they're still doing vital, important ministry as they've always done. Here in Northern Illinois, thankfully, we have not lost hardly any congregations to disaffiliation. But the opportunity, I think, to rethink, reform ourselves, be more effective going forward is very much something that can come out of the kind of disruption that we've been through.
Right.
Again, I think you made reference to this in the previous segment, but God has a way of using our times of disruption, to help us create something new and maybe to get over the inertia that would block us from making the changes that we really need to make to really be faithful in making disciples and transforming communities and transforming the world.
Yeah, I mean, I often say that God's creative activity is most often present in moments of chaos, in moments of challenge, in moments of disaster. That's actually the moment where God's creative presence is most available. And despite all that we were experiencing in my context during the pandemic, during disaffiliations, during all of these things that were kind of coming together at the same time, was where the mission of the church became more clear, and where our mission and call to serve our neighbors became more evident and even more seen than before, because it was during this time where our church was able to develop these programs, so fill in the need where there was a gap, and where we really saw that happening. And so I'm really excited about this new season in the life of the church. I'm really excited that I'm seeing more and more folks using the hashtag BUMC to kind of display all the different facets of United Methodism and Methodism around the world, and what that looks like and what the possibilities could be. I think this is a moment of renewal, a moment of refocusing on mission and on ministry, and like you said, living into this new thing that God is doing to continue that mission of the church of making disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of our churches, of our communities, of our families, and ultimately of the world.
Yeah, amen. We at Wespath believe that God is by no means finished with United Methodist yet. And so our work is to try to assure that the church has the support from the kind of services that we're charged with providing to do its ministry and mission going forward.
That's right. Well, I'll turn it back to you, Bob and Frank. I don't know if there's any questions from the audience for us.
Well, thank you, Dale and Dolomar. Thank you for those words of truth and inspiration. We appreciate your perspective, and our viewers do as well. And yes, we do have a few questions for you. The first being, why has Wespath been serving the Global Methodist Church, and why is that relationship ending soon?
Good question.
Yeah. Well, you know, when you think about it, Bob, pretty much all of the clergy participants now that are Global Methodist clergy were United Methodist clergy previously, and so they had benefits that they had earned for United Methodist service that they are still entitled to for that United Methodist service, just like anybody who ever served in the UMC and maybe moved on to something else. So Global Methodist participants had account balances with us, or they had earned lifetime benefits that were going to be paid for them, or those that were retired maybe were already receiving benefits from us. And so when they initially asked us to be their retirement benefits and health benefits provider, it really kind of made sense because they were already our participants anyway and were going to continue to be for their United Methodist service. And we felt like it was the right and gracious and appropriate thing to do. And so we have served them starting last year up through June of this year. And as of July 1, they have informed us that they are now moving to Guidestone, which is the kind of Wespath counterpart for the Southern Baptist Convention, moving to Guidestone as of July 1. So as of July 1, future benefits in the Global Methodist Church will be through Guidestone rather than through Wespath, although many and probably most of those participants will still have Wespath benefits from their time as United Methodist. We're sorry to see them go, but we realize that probably their administrative model will fit better with Guidestone than it does with us. And for some of them, not all, for some of them, perhaps their values are better aligned with the Guidestone values than they are with ours.
Thank you for that, Dale. We'll go back to our host for another question.
Thank you, Dale. Appreciate you both taking these live questions. This is really a consolidation of a couple of viewer thoughts here. Will Wespath losing the Global Methodist Church impact our business in any significant way? Will it hurt people that are staying in the UMC? And ultimately, will GMC leaving affect my own retirement plan?
Yeah, I think the answer would be no to, thankfully, no to all of those questions, Bob. The number of Global Methodist participants, a couple thousand or so, that's really small compared to the 90 or 100,000 other U.S. participants that we have in the UMC. Because the plan was very new, the amount of assets that will move over to Guidestone as the plan transfers over will be very, very small, pretty much de minimis in relation to our total assets. And we expect that not all perhaps, but maybe a number of and many of the Global Methodist clergy may decide to leave their United Methodist benefits with Wespath going forward. So we do not foresee a negative impact on either individual benefits or on Wespath strength and operations overall, thankfully.
Well, thank you for that, Dale. We have several questions that will kind of round out to be, do we expect more disaffiliations after General Conference, or do we think things have stabilized?
The legislation that enabled disaffiliations, paragraph 2553, expired as of 12/31/2023. So we think probably the large wave of disaffiliations is gone. There may still be some that get processed through other provisions of the discipline, but for the most part, we expect probably that things are relatively stable, probably not completely to the end of it, but sort of like with COVID, it was a big thing for a while and it affected everybody and kind of shut everything down, and it hasn't gone away,
Right.
But it is no longer kind of the threat that it was for a period of time. I think disaffiliations are kind of in that same realm from as best as we can see.
That's right.
Dale, we have just one more question that came in. I don't know if you can answer this or give your perspective, but why do you think that those who have already left the United Methodist Church are still actively trying to encourage others to leave?
Well, that's one I probably shouldn't try to answer. I suppose if someone feels like that, that they have captured sort of the ultimate truth, then there might be a kind of human nature to try to help lead others to that truth as well. I like to give everybody the benefit of the doubt. But I guess that's probably a question that ought to be asked to one of those persons who's engaged in that.
Well, I appreciate you trying to handle that question, Dale. And I want to thank you both, Dale and Reverend Dolomar, on behalf of Wespath and UMC for your passion and for your commitment and for being able to share this information and taking these tough live questions. Viewers, next week we will be following up with those additional resources, links to the recordings, as well as a brief survey. We encourage you to do that survey just to let us know your thoughts on Live from Wespath so that we can build future Wespath-sponsored events.
Stay tuned for our next segment called Your World, starting at 2 o'clock Central Time. This segment will provide an update on the proposed Compass retirement plan and the new HealthFlex Care Coordination Service. We'll join you back here at 2 o'clock p.m. Central Time. But in addition, we're going to open up the chat during the break. To click on the chat icon, which is next to the Q&A icon, just say hello, where you are from, and where you serve. See you back here at 2 o'clock.